Good evening. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to the 18th edition of the BW Education Wednesday Wisdom. We've been doing this throughout the lockdown and we continue to discuss and ideate on various facets of the education domain. Like last week, this week we're discussing the new education policy. How will we implement it? What are the realistic timeframes to implement certain parts of it? Getting into granularity on some of the aspects that for many years have been but haven't changed. So it's a good vision document, but somewhere it's low on granularity. So we'll discuss that. We have a very eminent panel of both educationists, educational entrepreneurs, of school leaders, and people who have in some way lived through this discussion about having a new education policy for the last 20 to 30 years. Let me start in no particular order. Request Mr. Aditya Berlia to make his opening remarks on what are his comments on the new education policy and how do you see it being implemented.
Thank you so much, Annurag, for having me on this platform. It is always a pleasure and great to see such esteemed colleagues from the education world with us. Just on the opening, I love the NEP. We have been working in the past around 60 years with all aspects of the regulatory government after government, and we are very, very happy and pleased as the Apeejay, Stya and Svran group, as well as CII, to see a lot of our suggestions, sometimes verbatim, quite frankly, are now have come into the policy. And so I cannot be more delighted. This is absolutely what the country required and needed. And to my great shock, it has been passed by the cabinet, which does, after seeing draft after draft after draft, year after year for the last 2 decades, seeing something that has the signature of cabinet is a very, very lovely thing to see. Now, as Annurag said, and I'm going to go very nitty-gritty into it. First, I highly recommend everybody read the original 350-page draft, then the 74-page, then down to the 65-page, because it's important to understand context and intent. Because what will now happen is that this policy will now be put into law. And given the gravity and the revolution, and I think the media has barely scratched the surface in explaining the degree of revolution this policy brings about, they're going to have to, at least at my last count, amend, scrap or redo 12 major central acts. There's a number of acts at the state level which will also have to be amended and changed. And the devil will be in those details. And while you have a grand vision, a lot of this, by the way, was well covered in the 1965 UGC documents and policy vision. So in many ways, India was a leading light, I think, in the 50s and 60s. And this was one of my theses when I was at the Harvard Business School on studying the education policy from back in the day. We lost our way in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And now it's really heartening to see us back. But so the first thing I would say, context is important. Understanding that what were the framers thinking in the larger policy document will give you an understanding of what singular words or sentences actually mean. The second big issue, as I said, was multiple laws have to be passed. I really hope that once the policy moves out from the visionary hands of the framers and of the politicians and goes into the civil service hands, that they're able to capture and maintain a lot of things that are there. I know many of it is asking the government to give up a lot of power. There is a lot of institutions which will lose the control they have. I'm excited because the kind of what I call sheer audacity of corruption, extortion that had come into the system will be removed. But this is going to impact a lot of players who are very used to giving dikkats and shaking down institutions and enjoying a sense of authority and power that they had no business having. Now, that will be very hard to let go of. So one of the big considerations is that how will those actors react to the policy and how will they interfere in its implementation to make sure that it's there. The third part is that a lot what the act and the policy really looks at is transforming public education more so than just private education. Now, I have always maintained, and we have always maintained as an organization, that a private education should always be a luxury for students across India. Number one case, number one go-to for any student should be a government school or college. Only when they get something extra, something much more than what the government school and the college can offer, then they must go to private institution. I think that has been very well covered.
Aditya, I'm sorry, I don't like interrupting, but also high, autonomy may bring high school fees. That's a big fear.
So absolutely. And it should. It should absolutely bring larger and larger school fees. But I will break it into two very interesting things. First, every student should have the option of a fantastic government school which they should go to, and this policy enables that. So no middle class parent who cannot afford private fees should feel bad that they can't afford private school fees, because right now the only reason why they are upset by private schools is because the government school alternative is so terrible. I think bridging that gap is the first step, that private schools should be a luxury in this country and should be priced as a luxury product, not as an essential commodity, and nor should they be regulated as an essential commodity. The second thing is what this act does, which is wonderful. It scraps the horrific, misguided Right to Education Act, which started with good intentions, but it disseminated a standard policy, a cookie cutter approach to private education, which prevented both at the school and college level truly innovative models of private education. This policy will encourage private philanthropic efforts to bring in so many new private schools, which will truly offer a differentiated curriculum and product that meets parents' aspiration and needs. Why should every single school be duplicates of each other, duplicate admission system, duplicate curriculum? No, that should be what the government does. Private schools need to come up with their own unique standard points. And yes, somebody wants to charge 50 lakh rupee fees, there'll be those people. But how many people can afford 50 lakh rupee fees? Once you have 100, 200, 300 new schools that will come in, automatically there'll be competition. There'll be some people who will say, look, we are going to aim for the bottom of the pyramid market. They will come in with cheaper fees. And that type of distinction is what this policy will bring in, both in school education and higher education. And that will be to the benefit of the student.
Okay. Aditya, I just want to ask, because you want to go, so I'll ask you this question. One is, you also have a B school, right? You have a media school, you have a business school. Now tell me, what are the changes you see in the curricula of a B school, both in the context of the pandemic last 5 months and in the context of the new education policy? Of course, there is a vision for a single education regulator. You're bringing all the regulators. And that's happening in financial services. That's happening in every sector. But tell me on these aspects, what's your view? So, and what else is what is the document weak in? What directionally? I mean, no document can be perfect. No policy can be perfect. What are the areas in the policy that need improvement?
So I'll be very quick. So I'll take that as two separate questions. So the first question. So we have the Apeejay Satya University as well, which is a multidisciplinary university where we also have management programs, right? That was our vision. A complete every student must take 11 foundational courses across site subjects, all sorts of stuff. Again, I often say people that they have cut, copied, pasted from our policies directly into the NEP. I'm delighted. We do have standalone management colleges, and now many of them are accredited by international bodies, and these will now have the opportunities to get off that cookie cutter B school approach. Although we've innovated within the framework as much as we were allowed to, we couldn't truly convert them into international multidisciplinary centers of excellence, where management might be their focal point, but should not define them as management schools. So we are very excited. On the other hand, I think a lot of colleges in India, and the earlier draft of the policy, now they only talk about B.Ed, claim that at least 20 to 30,000 colleges will have to close. Absolutely, and they should absolutely close. I think India needs a huge watershed moment. A large number of private schools and colleges, a large number of government schools and colleges need to be asked a question. Either you step up to become a multidisciplinary institute of excellence who deserves autonomy, or you get shut down. My biggest worry, however, is that in the final draft, they stripped off the ability of the higher education person to actually mandate the closure of all these colleges and schools, which is something which I'd like to be seen. There are a lot of people, and all of you have seen them on your drive from Delhi to various places and from Bombay to various places, who are running mom and pop cookie cutter shops, which are a college in name only. They will be given the opportunity to step up, and if they do, that is absolutely fantastic. We need infrastructure, we need investment, we need people to step up, and those who don't should gracefully, very gracefully, no one should be punished or this or that, very gracefully with a proper exit say, look, you can't do this anymore. I think where the policy is silent, and which they took out, I think for political reasons, is that I would have liked to see if they had advised and tinkered with the for-profit and philanthropic model more finely, not so much in terms of school fees, but in terms of structuring. In the last budget, the finance minister had said, in the last two budgets had said, in fact, and I know many people miss this desire to come up with a social entrepreneurship philanthropic stock market, which was supposed to act as a parallel market, which is a very interesting thing. And the initial policy idea was that all these philanthropic areas, we talk about how money will be raised, was to instead bring these out of the capital markets, which are standard, and bring them to this social capital market, which would be a parallel market. That articulation has not come into the final draft as much. And I think the articulation of safe harbor rules, which has plagued a lot of institution in terms of company law, taxation, trust law, society law, and state law, those paragraphs should have been put in. My hope is in the implementation when they actually do it. One of the beautiful things the NEP says that it is impungent on the government to promote private education, which no policy in the history of India has ever said that we want to promote private education. It says it several times there, that in the interests of this...
The government realizes that while it's a fundamental right and it's the basis of the country and the economy, like in all other sectors, government is trying to...
Annurag, absolutely. I'll give you some numbers, right? The entire higher education budget of India, central government, is equal to the annual budget of Harvard University. One single university in the world has the entire higher education budget of the central government. You cannot create a large-scale education, 1.3 billion people, high quality, without figuring out a...
That's why I said funding. So we'll come to funding. Thank you, Aditya, for your opening comment.
Thank you, Ji.
Thank you. Let me bring Mrs. Lata Vaidyanathan, who to a community of educators or students or any decision makers in the country doesn't need an introduction. Mrs. Vaidyanathan, you created future leaders, you created students who have gone on to excel. You're part of creating institutions, and you've been hearing this debate about what should change in the education ecosystem and policy for many decades. Tell us, what is your opening comment and response to the education policy?
Thank you, Annurag. I think the dimension of our current conversation goes a little beyond very opening sharp comments. However, I agree with a lot of things Aditya said just before me. But I think the taste of the pudding will really lie in how it works. When I was going through, I have gone through that 350-page policy, which he talked about, and then this 74, then the 68, whatever the numbers, each day we get a shorter version of it saying this is the crux of it. We went through that when Dr. Kasturi Rangan was asking and inviting comments. And of course, I must admit that our focus was essentially the school sector. And when I look at the whole document, I can see that in spite of the single regulator and such things that the whole document has, the actionable reality for the schooling sector is far less when compared to the kind of opening that we see in the higher education sector. But having said this, I have to say that when I look at the school side of the document and the vision, therefore, for it is very exciting in the sense that it actually launches us into the next century and also talks about the kind of workforce that we'll really be seeing, and therefore, are we ready for the same? However, if you look at the preface to all the three documents, whether it was 86 document, whether it was the 68 document, 86 document, and its revision in 92 and thereafter now, one is very clear that there are except in the phraseology, the incremental changes that you see must translate into that amount of independence that we are looking for in schooling sector. The whole schooling sector must be the responsibility clearly of the government to provide the kind of education. And I'm in complete agreement of what Aditya said, that if there is private education, it can be expensive. It should be thought of in the way it is done. It has to have a different kind of a vision structure. And people who want it should pay for it and get it. But however, right now the structure is that even the private education has a whole lot of over-regulation, and this current document does not really free us from that. It does not free us from the over-regulation of the states. However, in days to come, hopefully there'll be some more deeper understanding of how this will actually happen. Because I think other than for people to understand the cosmetics of this, the working will come when the state governments actually set forth and release their documents. Because in spite of private education being private, each state has its own regulation even over the private sector. And I think we have all faced the problems of this over-regulation. Now, having said that, in the early, I think the one little pleasure that I get from this is saying that none of the dreams of how a very good education will function, particularly the public school education in this country, they have at least moved up to 6% of the GDP. I sincerely hope that this will actually filter down into the schooling sector where it ought to be. And if you look at the number of children out of the system, it's so humongous that putting a number is only just numerical value. It doesn't go beyond that. And of late, as we see the current pandemic, even of those enrollment, first is getting them enrolled. Does the policy really support all of that 100%? Then retention of them, how do we do it? And then providing absolutely well-informed, trained, proper teachers to run the entire system and translate the vision of this to an actionable reality. All that is subject actually to the fact that the states will take deeper interest and give us that correct force with which we need to monitor and govern this whole system.
Thank you.
What I really want to say is, I think the news about, it was I think just 2 days back that we found that during this current pandemic, even those who have enrolled in the school, whether it is of the RT category, whether it is just government school children, whether it is, I'm not even talking of private education. In these, they said 15% children are not even traceable, let alone anything else. And on the other side, you have a statistic which says 48% children are actually looking for private school education.
Sure.
So when the government fails, and when I shouldn't be saying this given this large country and looking at the challenges that are there before the government and its ability to cater within each state's differences, budgets, population, geographical layout, and the ability within the states and the multilinguistic community that we are and the diversity of populations that we have, I think it is a huge challenge. Of course, this policy seems to address all of that in a certain way, but for schools, I'm still a little anxious about the detailing of it because the truth will lie in the details. The devil will lie.
I just want to ask everyone to keep their comments as brief. Aditya, I gave chance because he won't get. So let me bring in Mr. Aman Mittal. You heard Aditya, you heard Mrs. Lata Vaidyanathan. Your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Annurag, for inviting me for this event. And I think as Lata ma'am has mentioned that you're anxious with respect to the school education policy implementation part of it. I think at the higher education level, I think we are also very anxious because it is just a vision statement as we can really understand. But I think the implementation part has not really been talked about and not even discussed about in the whole, even the bigger part, 350 pages document as well. Because but I think we should give this time to the government and give this brownie point to the government that at least that vision has been put in a right context. It's not a smaller, they could have really goofed up with the vision as well. And they said, okay, we want to achieve, could have copied something from the US, the UK and said, okay, done, copy pasted and we are done with it. But I think the whole the kind of work, the homework, the kind of discussion that has happened while drafting this vision document is fabulous. I think we should definitely give this point, though we have waited 34 years for it. But I think at least on the vision document, it is a great document, and it clearly says that this policy would be implemented in phases by 2040. So I think the government has already kind of clear that it's going to be taking 20 years to implement this policy. So while everybody's anxious,
in its entirety,
it will take 20 years to be implemented. So let's not get very overboarded about that. Oh, I don't know what's going to happen. There's no miracle. There's no magic wand with anybody, not even with the government. So I think, as everybody said, it's the devil lies in the detailing. So let the detailed document comes up. The good part is that they think about as a vision. They on the higher education level, they've talked about a single regulator, which seems really good on the face of it. I think we also think it's pretty good. But I didn't know whenever a single regulator comes in, all the power comes to one regulator. Absolute power corrupts absolutely becomes also a problem. So I didn't know will it be a solution or a problem. But also it is a problem in a way that how one regulator would be able to understand the deep dive knowledge of every sector, architecture, pharmacy, medical, engineering, physiotherapy, and a hell lot of things. How those would be encapsulated in one regulator and ensuring that it's done in a right way is a big challenge. Second thing is talked about that research funding would also be a single research funding agency would be created. Again, it sounds like a challenge to us because different organization, different sector has a different funding needs. A medical science funding requirement would be very high. They would, for a very basic thing, they would need a 5 crores or 10 crores of budget, while probably for a sociology or some other smaller aspect, there would be a smaller kind of budget. I don't know how they're going to map it in a right way. So I think there's a lot of questions which have thrown up after this policy have come up. But as in the university, lovely professional university, I think we are pretty much kind of happy with the vision document. It has also created a lot of eyebrows in terms of how the regulation of fees and other things will also happen, because they have also talked about that. I don't know, while we are talking about quality at one end and want to cap on the pricing at one end, doesn't sound really good. Let market be the regulator. I mean, as Aditya said that they would be taken for upper funnel, lower funnel, or the larger pyramid. So it depends upon where you want to play, and let market decide what could be charged. There's so many colleges getting shut down because of the quality, not because of the regulator, because the market didn't get in the right students and they have to close down. So I think market is a very big regulator. We should allow market to play that regulatory role as well, and the government has to understand it. One last comment which I want to make is on the overarching vision to have a multidisciplinary research institute in every district. The kind of budget that they're asking for, I don't know where that money is going to come from.
That's a big question. That's why I said funding, because we talk of overall spends going up. We talk of funding coming for this. There are only two ways. One, it becomes philanthropic. The biggest universities in the world have been built by industrialists who wanted to contribute to the nation. And second is maybe privatizing a lot of government, existing institutions. These are the two only possible ways that look right now.
But I would just want to add in all the US and UK, well, Harvard and Yale, they have come as a private players, but the government didn't fail their role of creating bigger public universities, public school system, which is really, really good. So I think privatization can play the parallel role, but it cannot take away the government role.
Otherwise, how does the funding come? It's silent. We've not even spent the money that we allocated in the past. We've not even actually brought it. So going from 2% to 6% in the policy document is great, but where will it come from? Where will it get? And
it was always 6%. It was always 6% in the initial 86 policy as well, but never came in.
So, and there are two things that I'd like to ask everyone. One is, what would you do in your institution, keeping in line with the spirit of the MEP? And second is, it's a real question. Do you think at some stage LPU can? I know I visited your campus, a lovely campus.
Thank you.
Do you think a university can exist on a cloud in 10 years? You don't need a building, don't need spending on that infrastructure, but a different kind. These are two questions I'll come to. But at this point, let me bring in Dr. Kuncheria, Isaac. Dr. Isaac, your opening comments.
Thank you, Dr. Annurag Batra, for providing this opportunity to be in a panel to discuss on the national education policy. This is the first time I'm getting getting a large number of people from the school sector. So my first remark for the national education policy is that the school education, how it's going to be geared to provide students who can do higher education. This is the first challenge this country is facing today. We want to increase the GER from 26 to 50 over the next 10 years, but today the seats are lying vacant in most of the institutes.
Yes, so it's good to have good targets, but they should be realistic. That's another,
yes.
It is aspirational that the gross enrollment ratio should become 3 times in certain cases and 2.5 times in certain subsections. But is that realistic? And over what time period? 20 years? That's too long. Go on, sir.
So that is what. So the policy well clearly states that we have got to create people with creativity. Creativity is given more importance in the document. So how do we achieve that in the school? Again, in the college level, is something which each one of you will have to discuss. Because the policy says, how do we get into the implementation is something which everywhere in the education field will have to think of it. So when I look into the document with respect to higher education, now I leave the school education because a lot of people business, which is not my cup of the tea. So what I have seen in this document, if you look at the policies which has been told in the document is most of the things, I would say. It says large multidisciplinary universities, autonomy to the institutions and to the teachers, update curriculum, leadership, to create people with leadership qualities, light but tight regulation, research. All this we have been talking for the last 10 years. See, I have been with the All India Council for Technical Education as a member secretary from 11 to 14. I remember that we have been discussing all this right from 2010 till this document. So I would say that most of the documents, most of the policies which has been enlisted in this is an aggregation of what has been happening over the last 10 years. So the point here is that though we have been talking about all this and have been implementing some of these things, the progress which we have made in this is very minimal. So how do you improve the speed of implementation? Is the real task which we have to do it. I just go to a small thing which most of you are from Delhi. In the Delhi University, Professor Singh has implemented the 4-year bachelor's. And everybody stood against him and then he had to go out of it. This is something which is bad. So how are we going to implement the 4-year program? I accept most of the things as progressive, good things to improve the quality of education. So this is the first thing which I wanted to tell you. How are we going to get into the implementation mode? How fast we can go in this direction? The speed, the efficiency, the speed and the efficiency with which we are going to do it. For which, if I cite the example of this, how are we going to first make this change management? So this is the first one. See, I have seen that we have in this document, which I find a difference is that you can get exit policies have been defined. Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are talking about an academic bank of credit. A very good progressive one. But why, my question is, again, I go to the next level. Why we are not telling that this is the number of credits required for this 1-year certification. This is the number of credits which you have to earn to get into a diploma. These are the number of credits you require to get a 3-year one. I mean, why we are not going? We are again telling about the number of years and things like that, rather than getting into the actual one. I can do it. I mean, I can earn 100 credits in 2 years. I mean, if I am so smart, no? Why are we restricting and we are telling still on the
Sure.
timings?
Thank you, Dr. Isaac, for your opening comment. We'll come back to you on some of the things you raised. Mukesh, you're a software entrepreneur. You have a very large software company. What prompted you to get into education? Why did you start this school? And tell us, is there a sync between what you want to do and what the national education policy has kind of envisaged?
Thank you, Dr. Annurag, dear esteemed members of the panel, and those who are attending the session. It is my pleasure to be part of this discussion on national education policy. I am a first generation entrepreneur. I was born and brought up in BITS Pilani campus. The life skills that I acquired doing my graduation at BITS Pilani actually helped me significantly. I used to hate rote learning, and I always wondered why we are taught what we are taught. Instead of complaining about the education system, which I remember doing it when I was growing up and not doing well in studies, I chose to change it by starting Prometheus School with a vision to nurture the next generation of global leaders who can thrive anywhere in the world. And at Prometheus, we are on a mission to create a community of curious, lifelong learners who are risk takers, not scared of failing, through compassion, collaboration, and creative pursuits to achieve global sustainable goals. Now, the new education policy that has recently been announced is in line with what we are doing at Prometheus. I am so happy to see India get future ready with a long needed change in education policy. Thanks to Kasturi Ranganji and his committee for bringing up this. The National Education Policy of 2020 is a great step by the government. Our other panelists have spoken about what is there in the education system. It's going to bring holistic, flexible, multidisciplinary, aligned to the needs of the 21st century. As I know, having been running an IT company, wherein I see that the jobs that exist today may not exist tomorrow. What do we need to do? The students who are learning a particular subject and not doing well in a particular subject are made to look bad. Why can't children follow what they are passionate about? And with the new education policy, I think it will help in bringing transformational reforms both in school and higher education and shape India into a global knowledge superpower. Now, my friend Aditya talked about the research budget as well as the regulations. It's great to have a singular focus on research, but to expect each student to immerse a whole year on research without adequate government support is going to be tough. In the new policy, the final year of a 4-year program will now focus entirely on research. Instead, you could have an alternative option to institutionalize industry internship, just like what we have at BITS Pilani, wherein the last semester, or if you're doing a dual degree, the final year is essentially towards internship. You could work in a particular company, and that the university has a tie-up with. The government spend on research has been just 0.6% compared to what the countries like Israel, 5% is what their research budget is, and 2.2% of is the budget in China. Setting up the National Research Fund is a good move, and as a nation, we need to pump in more funds into research. I think Prometheus School is an initiative that I've taken because I truly believe that we can create entrepreneurs in this new age, the digital learning age. See, when the COVID-19 happened, and I'm deviating from the national education policy, but you had brought up a question which was about the new normal. Do we think that there is a possibility of having online schools, online colleges? And I think that is going to happen. One has to be prepared for it. A lot of parents in United States and even in India have started homeschooling. Now, with the new education policy and the government focus, if we are able to bring in private and public partnerships together, we could have platforms like Fundu, which allows schools and universities to have their learning videos specifically for their school or university. That's something that government can start for each state. For each each state could have those. And those in localized languages as well. If I were to think about what is it that we are, when we say that by 2030 the gross enrollment ratio in school education would be 100%. They are anticipating that.